Oh, I
All
need.
right.
I haven't heard
This
that
is Dave
expression.
Benyon. This is for the Franklin Historical Society. And we have Brian Rainville here interviewing, and our ladies are
Helen Dever.
Hilda Hendrickson.
Gerard.
very good.
All right.
So-
Thank you, Dave.
Yep.
Here we go. So I'm excited this morning to have three longtime campers in our series. You folks have been in this community longer than many of us who are year-rounders. What can you tell me about how you found your way to Lake Carmine?
I guess I'll begin. I'll be more than happy to share this with all of you. My grandmother came up in 1933 with 3 of her sons. Of the 6 sons, my father was the youngest. And 20 years later, we're sitting around at dinner with my grandparents, and my dad said, wait a minute, I remember going to a lake. I must have been about 7 or 8 years old. Where was the lake? So we got the maps out. He figured out, we all chatted, and he figured out it was Lake Carmine in Franklin. So on vacation, he was a fireman for New York City. On his vacation, we took 2 weeks and came up to Lake Carmine. That was in 1952. And I've been coming up to the lake, other than 7 years of my life, every summer since then. For 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. When my son and daughter came up with us when they were born, my daughter was 1.5. She's been coming up to the lake since she's 1.5. My son was 4. And every year they come up. So it's been a while. It's been quite a journey. Quite a journey.
Nice.
I just became, I can talk about this, I think, too, since I'm talking about history. I just became a great-grandmother 3-4 months ago. My granddaughter, Cecilia, will be 6th generation in my family coming up to Lake Carmine since 1933. And we're from New York. We're from Queens, New York. Other family was from Manhattan. And we've been coming up ever since.
Nice.
It's a very special place.
Thank you, Helen. Hilton?
How my husband and I got here from the lake, his cousin Arthur Goss owned a cottage on Patton Shore. And they would invite us to come up with our 4 kids and a big German Shepherd. And we would spend quite a few weekends at the Goss camp on Patton Shore. And we were lucky enough to buy a cottage down Patton Shore in, I'm thinking, 1978 or 1979. And loved it. Came every weekend. We lived in East Montpelier at the time. Owned that cottage for, I'm going to say, about 6 years. Then we moved to Burlington and had a house close to the lake. Sold the cottage, and then about 5 years later, we missed Lake Carmine. So we came back up cottage hunting, house hunting, camp hunting, and found our camp on Vic's Crossing. We bought that, I'm going to say, in 1998, give or take a few years. It needed a lot of work, so for the first winter we gutted it, came back and realized the camp shifts in the winter. So a lot of the windows didn't open and close well. A couple of the doors got sheared right off because we had closed the doors. So we learned how to live at camp. And then when we retired, we spent the whole summer and added some more onto the camp and added a 2-car garage. I've been active in the Lake Carmine Campers Association, been on the board there for a good 8 or 9 years. And I'm now retired in Florida, and come February I keep thinking, going up to the lake in a few months, what am I going to plant in my flower boxes? What am I going to do? So, and I am now deeding my cottage to my children, so they will come up, which they always do every summer, and I hope they keep it for many generations on.
Nice, nice, thank you.
And me, I came when my parents came. My parents came here on their honeymoon. They went to Quebec, and then they came back to visit an uncle who had a camp rented in the Miller cottages. And they had the outhouses and you name it, but they loved it. And then my father decided he was not going anywhere else. He was coming to Lake Carmine, and he was going to build a cottage. And he was talking to one of his friends, and his friend was Ed Mencken, and he happened to be an industrial art teacher in New York City. And he said, Ken, I bet I could have my class design a cottage for you.
How neat.
And that's what he did. He designed the cottage for my dad.
And Carol, your cottage has an important part of United States history in it, yes?
Excuse me?
Your cottage is tied to a World's Fair?
Oh, yes. My father had a contract with the World's Fair in the French Pavilion. And every night he would come home on the train, but he would get off, and I forget where the fair was.
Flatbush, I think.
Where?
I think it was out in Flatbush. No, Flushing.
Flushing.
No.
Flushing.
Oh, the
It was-
Flushing World
Yeah.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was where?
Flushing World Fair.
That's right.
Long
Flushing.
Island.
And so he'd get off the train,
Oh, my.
and he would walk until 2 or 3 in the morning, taking the building down.
Oh.
That was his agreement with the people, to take the building down, and he took all the doors and all the windows, and they're still in Lake Carmine.
Oh, that's neat. That's a good part of history.
And let me tell you, there's not a broken window in that house. It's been lifted, it's been shaped, it's been a lot of things, but not a window broken. So it has a lot of meaning to me and my family. I went the first time at 7 months old.
Oh my goodness, how neat.
Yeah, 7 months old, my mother took me over to, they rented over in Miller's. Do you know where Miller's is?
No,
Do you know where Miller's is?
Did you say Mullen?
Miller's.
Oh, Miller's.
Miller's.
No, not familiar with them.
Well, Miller's was the only cottages that were owned the property.
Oh.
There were, and the house is still there, across the street that Mrs. Miller lived in.
Oh my goodness.
You know where that is?
No.
Was that on the King farm?
No,
Oh, all right.
it's really,
Because that's a
Macadam meets the
doing
dirt
show.
road.
Oh,
And on this side,
yes.
not the lakeside,
Okay.
Other
In the
side,
street.
yeah.
that was the Miller
Corner house, the corner house there,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. Oh,
And then she owned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 houses there.
And she rented those
Yes.
houses? Oh,
and that's probably where my grandmother's, when she
They-
came up in 33, if the Millers were there, they owned the cottage
Yeah,
that she
but my mother
rented.
my mother and father
And there
got
was-
married in 32, so
Yes, my grandmother came up in 33 with the 3 boys, and one of my uncles was the first one in the family that had a car, and he had to do business in Chicago. So he left my grandmother with the 2 sons. But the roof leaked, so she always called it Everwet. That's what she always called it. But from 1933, yes, that was the first cottage. And they just moved that cottage down Doing Shore about maybe 10 years ago. They actually moved that cottage.
What was the name?
It was always there.
Was it the Honeymooner?
Oh, I'm not sure. I don't know. But I never knew the name of the person that owned the cottage
Was
in
it over
33.
on Hammond Shore?
Yeah, going down toward Hammond. It was the first cottage. They moved it. I'm going to guess about 10 years ago.
On the ice.
But I always remember every time we drove through all those years and we passed by, I would say, that's where my grandmother
That was something.
first rented the first cottage that my family continued to rent for all those years.
I said,
I've only missed 7 years at the lake during the summer in my whole life.
it was very small. Cottage.
Yes, oh, it was tiny. It was
Yeah.
tiny.
Very small.
And that's a good segue. How has camping on the lake changed in your experience? When you think of your first encounters coming to Carmi, how's it different now?
More modern. We used to bring our water from East Montpelier in jugs, coming for the weekend. Now we have the pump at the fire station, so we have water, and I'm more modern. I finally got a well last year up here, so I have good drinkable water. Have a washer and dryer. I don't have to go to a laundromat anymore. Makes it a lot easier and enjoyable for camp, for me.
We used to get pails of water from the lake, bring it in, and use a dipper
Wow.
to wash our dishes, to do. The lake was clean, it was beautiful.
Carol, speaking of your cottage, you told me an interesting story about a sawmill and the lumber for your cottage. Can you talk about where all that lumber came from that built your home?
The lumber came from the area around the lake. But then Mr. LaBelle, the man who lived in East Franklin, one of his sons also drowned at
Are you over
the mill
Mill
pond.
Pond? Yep.
The mill pond. He got drowned there, but Mr. LaBelle had a sawmill right there. And you know where the forest is?
Yes, yes,
On the
on
other
the mill pond, yeah, yeah.
And that's where he had the mill pond. And I can tell you this, I don't know if my father up there would want me to tell you this, but
We're all ears,
Please
Carol.
tell us. Please
it
tell us.
cost $800 to build that cottage.
Wow.
And he didn't have a penny. And my uncle was a Cadillac salesman in New York City. And so he had the money, but he could never pound a nail. We didn't have electricity, we didn't have anything.
No power tools.
Beautiful story.
No, we didn't have anything.
What does it mean to you all to come up to Lake Carmi? What weight does that carry to come to Franklin each season?
Can I share part of my story? Coming up, I started coming up in '52. I was 10 years old at that time. When I became a teenager, we came up every single year for at least 2 weeks, and we would always rent because my family didn't own anything at Lake Como, but it meant so much to us to come up. As a teenager, I looked at my brother one day and said, he had red hair, we called him Red. I said, Red, I'm going to move here someday. It took me many years. In 1991, I was able to get the first cottage at Lake Como. It meant so much to me knowing this was a dream I had since I was a teenager. I knew I had to live here. And with God's blessing, I was able to do it. And that true. I had very little money at that time. I was still teaching in New York City. And and what it means to me was a dream come true. That is really what it meant. Lake Carmine will always mean that to me. Always.
I think my memories of watching my children and grandchildren growing up at the lake and the first fish they caught, the first time they could take it off the hook and not cry, help, I caught a fish, help, help. Scavenger hunts, every summer we would have a scavenger hunt, the girls against the boys. I would go to garage sales all summer until 4th of July, all spring, and buy all these little toys and gifts and wrap them up. And girls always won, so the men had to do dishes, or the young boys that night, and cook supper. And the kids have wonderful memories. And now their new thing is, every time they're here, every day at 3 o'clock, let's go for a creamy. That's a tradition. Even if I say dinner's in 2 hours, no, Graham, we gotta have our creamy. Just the serenity of sitting outside and looking at the water, I think, is peaceful. And for me, it's memories of my family.
What was my memory? The best memory? You're going to think this is very funny, but there was a little store in Mrs. Miller's, in front of Mrs. Miller's house as you turn.
Oh.
There was a store there.
Was that in East Franklin?
No, right
Yes,
at the lake.
Right at the lake.
Yeah.
At the lake. And my brother and I used to go there and have an ice cream creamy. You know, the kind with the orange on the outside and the ice cream on the inside.
Popsicles.
And then there was a gazebo. And then we'd run around and play in the gazebo. And we would stay there for hours.
That brings me back to memories when we had our first cottage and the bowling alley was open by the boat launch. And after dinner, we would give the kids either bottles to return or a dime each. And the 4 adults, my husband and I, his cousin, would go out on the water lake for a sunset ride while the kids walked to the creamy stand and got a creamy and walked back. And by then, that was a nightly ritual when we were up here for the summer. And I missed the creamy stand so close.
Hilda, it's so interesting, but we had the same experience when my children were growing up at the lake. We lived on Vic's Crossing. We rented, I think, 3 or 4 cottages from you. And we would give them a dime, and they would go to the bowling alley, and they would get penny candy. The penny candy was the thing. They just loved it. They still talk about that when we talk about memories of the lake growing up. And they made so many friends, and they grew up with children, the Clark family, the Bouchard family. And to this day, whenever they come up to the lake, they come up every single year. They have come up every single year. And they all have a party, and all of them get together every single year. They have never lost contact with each other.
That's fantastic.
And they used to get the dime and go and get a creamy, or they would get penny candy, which they thought was amazing, coming from New York, from Queens, New York, to the lake. And there were so many just absolute cherished memories that they have. And they still come up today. And I feel when they do come up, it's like a renewal for them, because that experience of coming up and growing up here, even 2 or 3 weeks at the lake every single year, we showed them a different life, a totally different life than what they've lived in New York City. And to this day, they come up and they're renewed. They need to come up, and they come up, and they just so many memories that we have, sure that we've shared. Very similar, Hilda, to your family too, really.
And I think that's part of the wonder of Carmi. When you go to early Vermont history, you go to Zadok Thompson, 1848, and he pens this line that I've struggled with for a long time, talking about Franklin. The township is very much injured by a large pond. When Franklin was laid out, it was not considered a desirable township because you had miles of lost land. When you look at Carmi today, you have a fundamentally different experience because the community that developed on those shores is a fascinating thing. And if you could tell us a little bit about that community, and I know, Carol, you've talked about lobster bakes, you've talked about picnics, remembering getting the news on the radio that the war was over. Can you tell us about a little bit of that?
My father was great. He would always take us on hay rides. Some farmer had a flatbed truck, which they used to use for haying, and he'd get horses from somebody, I don't know who from, but Mr. King probably. You know the King farm?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
We used to eat there every Sunday. And we had a Sunday, like that was our treat. My aunt and uncle ate every day there. They had a little more money than we had, but we ate Sunday. But he would lend my father the horses, and we would go on the hayride. But then BJ Day, we ran out and had a wonderful time. Pots and pans and banging. We went up to the church in East Franklin and said a prayer. Oh my God, it was wonderful.
That's amazing.
Day.
Oh.
Carol,
It really was.
that's true. That's just wonderful.
But you know, like, you don't need a lot of stuff. You just need pots and pans and a little wagon.
A lot of noise.
We always had a horse, a hayride. My father always had a hayride for everybody on our land.
Oh, that's neat.
That's how our family would bring in every New Year. We would get the pots and pans out and run out into the street and bang in Queens. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But that's beautiful. I mean, the war was over.
It was
I
wonderful.
can't imagine. I can't imagine.
And, you know, as a kid, you don't really remember and you don't feel it. But I do now.
Yes. Oh,
I
yes.
do now. The feeling that now that I remember, like, there were like 30 people on the truck. And we all went in the church.
What a nice place to go, the church to celebrate. I like that.
Yeah.
I have a funny story that I just remembered. As I was going through old pictures, I found a picture of my two youngest sons, who are now 56 and 53, and they're holding this little perch, probably 4 inches high. I'm so proud at their age. And I realized it's the camp next to us. We rented it. And it's so amazing that we bought the camp next door, and I completely forgot we had rented that camp for a year. And when I say camp, now that I live in Florida, and I say I'm going to camp, my friends say, "What do you mean camp at your age?" I said, "No, it's a cottage." But for Vermonters, it's camp, and that's always going to be camp. So I switch back and forth. When I talk to my Florida friends, I try to say cottage so they understand. But when I'm up here, we're at camp. That's for sure.
Can I encourage you folks to talk a little bit about the camp tours and why those were created?
I guess I can begin. My son and daughter-in-law lived in, they still do, they live in Point Pleasant Beach, New Jersey. And every year, 10 people would offer their house to have a tour at their home as a fundraiser for the elementary school. It was the only fundraiser that Point Pleasant Beach had for their elementary school. I went to a couple of them. They would invite me to come up from Baltimore, and we would do the tour. It was always the first weekend in December, and it's still going on today. They would raise approximately $65,000 to $70,000 a year. That was the only fundraiser that the elementary school had. And they needed 10 volunteers to, show their house. And the house had to be decorated because it was the first weekend in December. The house had to be decorated for Christmas. And every year there would be a theme. And each cottage owner would decide what they would like to do. And they would have meetings. And that's what, so I thought, one September, it was our last meeting of the LCCA, the Lake Carmine Campus Association, and I was vice president at the time, and I offered this as a suggestion for something to do as a fundraiser for Lake Carmine, and that's how it started. Well, right after that, everyone said this would be a great idea. Hilda got in touch with me and said, Helen, we'll work together. We'll do it together. And the two of us really did the cottage tour. It was so successful the first year that we decided to do it again and asked 10 other people at the lake if they would show their cottage. And that's how it started. That's how it started. And Hilda was so nice because she remembered to bring everything of the cottage tour
I have the
that we have
original
done.
tickets there.
It was a lot of fun doing it. I think everyone really enjoyed it. They really enjoyed coming into your home and you're welcoming them. So it was very successple. It
Yeah,
worked out
we
well.
raised
But thanks to
close-
Hilda and I that we did this. Plus we had all of the wonderful encouragement from the association itself. And we had 10 people, to show their cottages, and the community came, and not only from Franklin, people from Bakersfield, St. Albans, friends from Burlington came up. It was really quite an event. It was a lot of fun. It was really a lot of fun. The second year was a lot easier. That we had everything connected and we had our program set out, and it was really fun.
And we had local restaurants come
Yes.
to each cottage
Yeah.
and give samples of their food, and that was wonderful. Jeff's Seafood House, Bernie's, can't remember them all, but years later people kept saying, are you going to have another cottage tour? Are you going to have another cottage tour?
Yeah.
Then Brian came up with the wonderful idea of the historical tour, which was a big success here.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun to include some farms, to include some barns. I had never had that many people through my kitchen before in a day, but it was a wonderful way to engage people in local history. And had you kind of realized the impact those tours would have when you started, the dialogue that would be created?
No,
Not at all.
no.
And I remember having people from South Burlington come up and going in, it's like the phone company. Oh my God, look at that stove. Oh, look at the old plug-in phone. Yeah. It was just amazing, and I wish we would have another one again like that.
We didn't have a phone then until like the 60s. We didn't have a phone. You go down to Ruth, down in the Franklin office, and you get her to call New York. My aunt and uncle had a little more money, and they used to call quite often. But they would go down to and use the phones. Oh my God, it was
There's still a payphone outside of Franklin Telephone, and you did. Ruth Toof would take messages and could also route you to where people were. More than once she said, "Oh, no, I won't connect it at home. They're headed to Riley's. Let me ring the general store."
I love that.
Franklin, was this a different time and place for Franklin when you started coming here, or does it still feel very much the same?
Parts of it feel the same and parts not. I mean, it's still a small, tight community, but it's gone along with the ages too. So I say a little of each.
Okay.
I think we've missed some of it. Like, I remember the ice cream parlor. We used to come down to Franklin to Riley's store, and then we'd go to the ice cream, the sweet shop,
Oh,
and that's not around anymore.
How about the dances, Carol?
Wow. That was my forte. I loved them, and I met thousands of people. Thousands.
You told me there were 2 dance pavilions.
Yes, there were.
Can you tell us where they were and what it was like going to those places?
Well, the first one was right at the end of our road, my road. And it was right there. It had John's, a hole in the floor, like a hole in the...
Yeah.
It was,
Outhouse.
yeah. And then I met the fellow that's father owned it just at a funeral a year or so ago. And it's amazing how people remember people. It's amazing.
Go ahead.
My grandmother danced at the pavilion and still talked about it. She goes, "This was amazing." She used to go over on a Saturday night. And then when they took them
And they
down...
had the big band.
Yeah, oh, the band, Sterling Reed. Sterling Reed's
Fantastic
band.
for Franklin.
Yeah, it was amazing. And lately, back in the 90s, or whenever they took those pavilions down, I don't know when that was, but we would all go to the Pine Cone, where Sterling Reed Band was playing, and we would all congregate there, but that was back in the 90s. Then I went, but I didn't go before that. But my grandmother still talked about that through
my
so many
God.
years.
Dances
That
were
she would
wonderful.
dance in the pavilion. And I'm going, "Graham, what are you talking about?" As I was growing up. I never danced at the pavilion. I danced in the Pine Cone.
I used to go
I thought it was
I
at
could
the
go
dairy.
until intermission.
The dairy, oh, I'm sorry, did I
Yeah.
say the Pine
Yeah,
Cone? Oh
yeah.
my goodness, no. Hilda's right, it was the Dairy Barn,
Yeah.
of course.
Nice.
And Sterling Reed would
Famous,
still be
yeah.
performing. This was in the 90s. That's where I
Yeah,
danced.
I heard him in Montgomery too.
That's right. Yeah, it was the Dairy Barn.
Yeah, it was local talent. You had Weed's Imperial Orchestra.
Yes.
And part of one of those pavilions still stands.
Oh.
When you turn onto Dewing, okay, from the bowling alley side of the lake, when you make that turn, right there in the corner, there's a very squarish camp. That is half of one of those pavilions that was converted. The other pavilion...
That's the other dance. Yeah, that's the other dance hall.
Never knew that.
I only remembered the barn.
Yeah, A History of the Lake is a project that we're talking about. We'll see what happens. How about ice cream socials? How about church brunches? What is it that holds the lake community together?
Chicken pot pie suppers, ice cream socials, and I remember years ago we had the decorated boat parade for many years on the lake, which was lots of fun. But ice cream socials definitely, and we just had one with the band from Colchester, and everybody was there who could be. And the cakes were delicious.
And we have a picture in the collection where, you know, you look at black and white and it is the same event a century and more ago. That's part of the glue that kind of holds Franklin together. Go ahead, Carol.
No, I was just thinking about
right.
the main street in Franklin. It was very different.
Oh, I didn't know that. Tell me about it.
There was the garage. It was not the garage that there is now, but there is no garage now, but it was a real garage.
Gas station and
Yeah.
all? Oh.
Yeah, Carol, it's so true. I remember first coming up in 52, 53, 54, Franklin had a dirt road. It wasn't even paved.
Oh, of course.
And my brother and I were fascinated with the blacksmith.
There we go.
He was shoeing horses when we were here. I remember, oh, of course, the sweet shop, definitely. That was always special. And of course, Riley's store. We
Yeah.
got to know Mr. Riley, Oscar, and his brother Flo. He was the butcher at the time. That's back in the 50s. Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, it was amazing.
Isn't
And
it?
then one year we came and it was paved, and that was, whoa. We were just, you know, just so excited that it was paved.
Well,
But,
it took us 9.5 hours
oh,
to come up
uh-huh,
from Long Island.
yeah.
My father used to come up every weekend to work on the cottage
Oh my,
because he didn't have time off.
yeah.
So it took him 4 years
To finish it
to
off.
finish the cottage.
I remember coming up from Queens, you're absolutely right. We used to take 11 hours because there were no highways. There were no
No.
highways. We would go 2-lane roads through Connecticut, Massachusetts, southern Vermont, all the way up north. It took 11 hours. But, and, oh, I don't know if I should share this, but I used to get car sick just on every trip just once, and then I was fine, right? And I'd say, Dad, pull over, and then I was fine the rest of the way. But it didn't matter to me. I mean, that was so uncomfortable, of course, but we were going to the lake. That was the most important thing. That's really very true. Very, very true.
My father just had a paper bag and he said,
Well,
"Yo, Dad."
there you go.
Just
I'd say, Dad, stop.
not stopping.
You all knew Franklin in the era of party lines.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember what your rings were?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
I don't know.
Do you remember your phone extension before the direct dial?
Oh, interesting you said that. I was just talking about that the other day. We were talking about the phone company. My first cottage that I was able to buy was 91 on Patton Shore, right next to the cottage I live in today. It was a small cottage, and I was so blessed to be able to actually buy it. It was a dream, as I said before, a dream come true for me in my life. And I had a party line. And it was, I never had a party line before. I lived in Queens, New York, and it was really interesting to me. But I remember Hugh Gates asking me every year, every spring, I would go into the phone company, say hello, and I'm back, and you know, just so joyful. And he would always say, "But do you really want to keep that party line, or I can give you a private line?" And I'd say, "You know what? I'd like to keep the party line." Because I never had a party line before. So that was interesting. He would always ask me every year.
Well, my kids were in middle school, the two youngest ones, and they wanted to listen in. And I kept saying, no, you have to hang up the phone if somebody, but we just want to hear what they're saying, Ma. No, you have to hang up the phone.
No, every morning we had a phone call from, do you remember the old lady who lived next to Mrs. King?
Mrs. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Mrs. King.
Oh, Mrs. King. I remember that lady.
That
She lived in a little house right on the property.
And she had one horse.
Oh my goodness. She had one horse?
Yeah, because we used to feed them.
Gosh, growing up, I would...
Mrs. Garrett.
What?
Was that Mrs. Garrett?
Oh my goodness.
The Garrett farm?
Carol.
You had the King farm and the Garrett farm next to it.
Oh, then it's gotta be. 'Cause
I-
that's-
Little tiny house.
Yes.
And every morning at 7
Oh
o'clock,
my goodness.
the phone would
Carol.
ring. Because we had a public phone too. And when we finally got a phone, and it was with Mrs. Garrett, that's right.
There we go.
And she was all alone in that house. And but this family called her every morning.
To check on her.
Cameron, you brought back such a beautiful memory. My brother and I, growing up, you know, in the 50s, or when we would pass by, we would take walks, and we would walk down,
Uh-huh.
we walked down Lake Road, and we would always wave to her because she was always sitting outside in her chair, and the two of us would always wave to her. You brought back such a beautiful memory. I'm starting to tear up a little bit because I can still see her sitting out on her porch. And we would always wave to her, and she would wave. But we never met her. We were young.
Garrett, that's
Yeah.
the name. I had forgotten.
Yeah, that,
To sum up another name, I'd like to bring Ray Heflin into the conversation because I think he built a fireplace over at your place, and I think he may have had a hand in a fireplace over your way as well. I know he did a few on Patton. Carol, you've talked about what that fireplace meant to you. Can you tell us a little about that?
The fireplace, it was a project, but it was wonderful because, what's his name?
Ray Heflin.
Heflin. He made my father take a truck down to, what river's down?
Maybe the Missisquoi?
Maybe. I'm not sure, I can't remember what river, but every stone was picked out.
Oh, wow.
And he picked it out himself. And he knew where each one was gonna go. He was amazing. But my father, before he had the chimney even thought, he used to go every morning. In the morning, about 5 o'clock, he would get up. Everybody else was sleeping. And he'd just go along the countryside. And he was looking for a fireplace. And that's the man he had do his fireplace. It was gorgeous. It was gorgeous. You've been in it.
yeah, definitely. Yes,
saw it.
yes. Absolutely.
So you think he might have done your fireplace,
I
too?
am going to try to find out who did build it, but my fireplace, the cottage, oh my, my cottage, the original cottage, the little one on Patton Shore, the small cottage with 2 bedrooms, that was built in 1921. Outside of my cottage next door that I now live in, I've been here 9 years already, on Patton Shore, has on the outside of my fireplace 1926 that my cottage was built. So I was just sharing this with Brian a few minutes ago. My cottage, the original cottage, was built it'll be 100 years old in 3 years. And the same man that built those 2 cottages, 21 and 26, built the one next door. They were the original cottages are all the same. A little cottage, 2 bedrooms upstairs. That's basically what, and I don't know who built it, but I am going to try to find out more of the history of my cottage, considering it's going to be 100 years old. So there'll be a lot of balloons that year, 3 years from now. Really, a lot of balloons and a lot of Evites going out, and just a wonderful party we'll have. It will be a centennial. It truly is amazing. It truly
Wasn't
is.
it Mrs. Umstead?
Possibly.
Our chimney was done by him.
I was thinking Ray Helen was involved in that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Ray did the painted curtain at the town hall.
Oh.
And I'm finding his fireplaces all over Franklin. If you are on the middle road, where the Warmans lost their house, you will see Ray Heflin's beautiful fireplace and tall chimney standing. And I think, Carol, you had a bigger version of that. You had a very wide and really 2 stories of masonry going up through that cottage. The Adirondack influence is really clear in Franklin. You know, the great camps, that gets rolling about 50 years before Lake Carmine's cottages, and you can see the cross-pollination. You all have been really fabulous this morning in sharing stories. What would your wish be for the future of Lake Carmine?
Oh, for me, a clean lake, definitely. I just hope we can have the federal and state funds to clean the lake so it can be swim classes for people, for youngsters.
Yeah, Mr. Weiss swimming.
It's
Swimming lessons.
Yeah, on the North Shore.
My kid goes up there.
Yeah.
Sure.
And the smell a few years ago was awful, and that would be my dream, is this lake be a clean and clear lake for everyone to enjoy.
And for our families to continue to come up
Yeah.
year after year and become renewed, you know, for their visit. Absolutely. Hilda, that's the first thing I thought of too. Yeah. We need a clean lake.
How do we preserve the physical history of the lake? How do we make sure those early cottages
Good
survive?
question.
Because we're losing them at a really alarming
Yeah.
rate. And I don't want to single out property owners because it's very complex as to
Yeah.
why buildings do or don't survive.
Sure.
But if you think of the scale of cottages when you first knew Lake Carmine, and you think of what you see today, how do we find a balance between a modern world and that history of Franklin being an Edwardian summer community?
That's a tough one, because just thinking of myself, when we knew we weren't going to come just weekends for the whole summer, I wanted everything new and nice and comfortable. And yet I still wanted that cottage feeling, so wood, you know, but yet I didn't want it dark, so we had a little sheetrock. But I didn't want patios and stone. I wanted to still sit on the grass, have a little fire pit by the lake at night for s'mores or just enjoying the lake. But it's a hard thing to do, to keep your history and integrity, and yet with modern day conveniences. For me.
Yeah, I don't think any of us would want to go back to having to use an outhouse.
You got it.
Oh, so true, Brian. So true. So true. And I think I'm finding that a lot of people they love the lake so much that they want to live there. They want to live there year round. And in order to do that, they have to change the cottage. The summer cottage is not a summer cottage anymore. It becomes a home. And that's the difference. Yeah. Since mine is still a summer cottage, I'm happy that way. I really love that, the feeling of a summer cottage being summer. But people are retiring and they love it so much and it renews them, that they want to stay all year. And I think that's one of the big changes too that have occurred in the past, I would say 20 years, 15 years.
To be able to capitalize on that renewal, that opportunity, that connection with nature, yeah, you want to go beyond a few weeks. I think that's understood. And I mean, it takes us all back to Henry David Thoreau of why we look for wilderness in our society. It's a chance to check out and relax, because if you're having breakfast with a view of that lake, the rest of the world disappears.
Oh,
Got
that's
it.
true.
You got it. There's
absolutely.
something so serene about looking out on the water. Can't beat it.
Yeah, I did have to stop for the ducks to cross this morning over by the bowling alley.
Did you?
I put the flashers on and I'm watching my mirrors to make sure the ducks get across.
Yeah, but
the bowling alley. I wish there was something for young people to do.
Were you a pin setter at the bowling alley?
Yes, I was.
Oh,
Were you really, Carol? Were
Yes.
you really?
Yes, I was only like 10 years old.
Yes, Carol.
I was only a substitute.
Yes. Do you know who we saw when
Jumping over
my
that
brother,
thing.
my brother and I came up with the first time? That's the first time in the early 50s that I ever saw a pin setter in my life. We had bowling alleys in Queens, but we never had. But George Ewing was the first young man that I saw doing pin setting
really?
at the bowling alley. I was amazed, and I still remember him, and he still lives in
Jumping over
West
that.
Berkshire. He still has a beautiful home.
did they
in West
pay you
Berkshire.
or just give you
Yeah, they
goodies?
paid me
Do you remember your salary?
25 cents.
Oh
Wow.
my, that's wonderful.
I love
Oh, my
it.
goodness.
And that was big bucks, 25
Sure,
cents for a young
sure,
girl.
Sure. Oh my goodness, Carol, that is, what a memory. Yes, oh, absolutely. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you just jump back and, oh
We were
my
fascinated.
God, when I ran
We
home.
were fascinated.
I was so proud of myself.
Of course, oh, of course, absolutely.
Did you all roller skate at the bowling alley?
No.
No,
No, I
never
did
done.
not.
Did you roller skate, Carol?
And later on, yeah, later on, with my nieces and nephews,
Oh, nice.
I did with them.
Yeah. You all have started a really magnificent conversation this morning. Thank you for sharing your memories of the lake, your connections to the community, your contributions to the community. I really would like to think Zadok Thompson was horribly wrong when he said that the township was very much injured by a large pond.
I agree.
Oh, absolutely. Oh.
In that time period, they didn't see what was possible, and we're blessed to have the lake and to have so many folks who've known it for generations. So thank you for coming in and being part of the conversation.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you
Look
for
forward.
inviting us, Brian. It's a pleasure to reminisce and
I
to share
think
our
that
stories
it's
with you.
interesting that the three people that are sitting here are not from Franklin, or not from the 5 minutes away. Now it's become a weekend place,
Yeah.
and I don't like that.
The
I miss the kids. I miss the rafts out there. The kids throwing each other off the
True.
raft.
There is not one raft, I think, there might be one way down Patton Shore, but you always had a raft for the kids to swim in,
Yeah,
lay on
and
the towel,
this-
jump in, and no more rafts. Maybe because the seagulls like them too much for
Oh,
a while.
true, Hilda.
But if you go back to the earliest camps, turn of the century, it was folks who came up from the season, from Boston, from New York, from Montreal. So you really represent that legacy. And your lineage in this town goes back much further than many of us who've lived here year-round. So thank you again for coming in. I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Brian, for
Brian.
inviting us.
Thank you for bringing back the memories.
That was fun, I enjoyed it.
You all were a gem of a panel because I just get to sit here and occasionally kind of punt something in and there we go. But I much prefer panels because then you get that interaction.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
you remember it.
Yeah, I can watch the ideas percolate and the stories come up. Dave, I forgot to put
We
my
have so
laptop
many
here
more.
so I could see the
We
clock.
have-
I have no idea how long we've
We
been.
have so many more
About an
stories
hour.
to tell.
Oh, good. So we fit really in one session. That's always my goal is to try
When
to...
will we be able to see this?
Well, you're looking at the editorial